Rich woman marries a fat man as a bet and is shocked when she married a fat man, convinced that winning every argument would be effortless. But just a few months in, her world was turned upside down. Read the full story and let us know where you're watching from. The city pulsed beneath her feet, a living, breathing entity of light and ambition. Skyscrapers stretched toward the heavens, their glass facades reflecting the restless energy of New York. From her penthouse balcony, Evelyn Carter could see it all. The world she ruled, the empire she had built alongside her family, and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And yet, even as she took a slow sip of her perfectly aged Merlot, she felt it, the gnawing emptiness beneath the surface. Evelyn had never been one to indulge in sentiment. At 38, she was the embodiment of success, elegant, composed, and utterly untouchable. As the only daughter of Richard Carter, a self-made real estate mogul, she had grown up in the glow of power and prestige. But unlike her peers, she had never been content to simply inherit wealth. She had carved her own path, proving to the world and to herself that she was more than just a name. She was a force. Her life was a meticulously curated masterpiece. Every morning began with sunrise yoga on her private terrace, followed by an expertly prepared breakfast of organic fruit and green juice. Her days were a whirlwind of negotiations, high-profile meetings, and power moves that solidified her reputation as one of Manhattan's most formidable businesswomen. Evenings were reserved for charity galas, exclusive events, and networking with New York's elite. It was a perfect life, or so she told herself. The problem with perfection, however, was that it was suffocating. Tonight, the city's social elite had gathered at the Celeste, the flagship hotel of the Carter Empire, transformed into a dazzling wonderland of crystal chandeliers, silver-draped tables, and a symphony of hushed conversations and clinking champagne flutes. Evelyn moved through the crowd with effortless grace, nodding at familiar faces, exchanging carefully rehearsed pleasantries. She had done this 1,000 times before. It was routine, predictable. And then there was him. Nathan Carter stood by the marble bar, lazily swirling a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. Unlike Evelyn, her younger brother had never felt the need to prove himself. Where she was discipline and control, he was indulgence and amusement. With his perpetual smirk and relaxed demeanor, Nathan enjoyed the privileges of their wealth without the weight of responsibility. And yet, for all his carefree charm, he was perceptive in a way that irritated her. "You always look like you're plotting world domination," he mused as she approached. Evelyn smirked, lifting her glass. "And you look like you're about to say something ridiculous," he chuckled, taking a slow sip before tilting his head. "Tell me something, Evie. Don't you ever get tired of all this?" She raised a perfectly sculpted brow. "Define this." Nathan gestured around the room. "The parties, the endless cycle of being perfect. The fact that you live in a world where every single person fits into a neat little box you've designed for them." Evelyn took a measured sip of her wine. "Perfection is why I'm successful." Nathan shrugged. "Sure, but it's also why you're predictable." That caught her attention. She narrowed her eyes. "Predictable?" He leaned in, his grin widening. "I bet you couldn't handle something truly unpredictable, someone who doesn't fit into your carefully controlled reality." Her lips curved into a slow smile. "What are you suggesting?" Nathan's smirk deepened. "A bet." Evelyn's competitive nature flared. She had been this way since they were children, always needing to win, always proving herself superior. "I'm listening." Nathan set down his glass and met her gaze. "I bet you can't marry someone completely outside your world and make it last 6 months. Evelyn's amusement didn't falter, but her mind was already calculating. "Marry? Not just date, not just a fling. A real marriage," Nathan clarified. "No loopholes, no easy outs. Someone who has nothing to do with our world. Someone you wouldn't even glance at." She studied him carefully. "And what do I get if I win?" Nathan leaned in, his voice lowering. "The controlling shares of Carter Enterprises." The word sent a thrill through her. Their father had built the company, but since retiring he had left control split between them. She ran the business, but Nathan held enough power to block her decisions when it suited him. If she won, she would have complete autonomy. "And if I lose?" she asked, though she already knew she wouldn't. Nathan smirked. "You admit I was right, that you can't adapt to something you can't control." She scoffed. That's it? You want a confession? Nathan chuckled. That's worth more than money. Evelyn considered the wager, the sheer absurdity of it, and the challenge it presented. A game, and she never lost. She extended her hand. Fine, you have a deal. Nathan shook her hand, his grin widening. This is going to be fun. As she sipped her wine, her mind was already racing. She needed to find someone entirely removed from her world. Someone who satisfied the bet's conditions, yet someone she could manage. It was only 6 months. How difficult could it be? Evelyn Carter had faced Wall Street sharks and outmaneuvered corporate giants. Finding a man for a temporary marriage? That would be nothing, or so she thought. Evelyn Carter never lost. That thought echoed in her mind as she sat in her private study, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The bet with Nathan had been impulsive, but now it was a challenge, one she was determined to win. The morning after the gala, she summoned her assistant, Sophie Reynolds, a woman as efficient as she was discreet. Dressed in a sharp navy pantsuit, Sophie entered the study with a tablet in hand, her expression neutral but alert. "You wanted me to compile a list?" Sophie asked, seating herself across from Evelyn. Evelyn nodded, swirling the black coffee in her porcelain cup. "Yes, I need a candidate, someone completely removed from high society, someone who has nothing to do with this world." Sophie raised an eyebrow, but didn't question her boss. Instead, she tapped on her tablet. "I've put together a list based on your parameters. Artists, school teachers, small business owners, blue-collar workers, none of them have elite backgrounds, and all are financially independent." Evelyn took the tablet and scrolled through the profiles. Each face stared back at her. A struggling musician, a bookstore owner, a social worker. But none of them intrigued her. They were too predictable. Too easy. Frustration simmered beneath her composed exterior. She needed someone who fit the conditions, but wouldn't be an obvious choice. Someone she could manage without them becoming too dependent on her. Then she saw him. James Weston, a 42-year-old auto mechanic from Brooklyn. No Ivy League education, no corporate ties, just a man who spent his days repairing engines and his nights volunteering at a homeless shelter. He had broad shoulders, strong hands, and a presence that seemed solid, unshakable. More importantly, he didn't need her money. His shop was small but successful, and his work at the shelter was done out of genuine care, not desperation. Evelyn read through his file carefully. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was respected in his community, known for helping struggling families by fixing their cars at reduced costs or for free. He had no known scandals, no debts that could be leveraged. He was completely outside her world. "Perfect. Him," she said, handing the tablet back to Sophie. Sophie glanced at the screen, hesitating. "He doesn't seem like the type who would agree to something like this." Evelyn smirked. "Then I just have to make him an offer he can't refuse." That afternoon, dressed in an impeccably tailored ivory coat over a fitted black dress, Evelyn stepped out of her car onto the cracked pavement of Weston Auto Repair. The contrast between her and the surroundings was almost comical. Sleek designer heels clicking against the worn asphalt, polished nails tapping idly against her clutch. Inside, the scent of oil and metal filled the air, the clang of tools punctuating the quiet hum of conversation. James was beneath a lifted truck, his denim-clad legs sticking out as he worked on something beneath the chassis. Evelyn cleared her throat. "I'm looking for James Weston." There was a pause before he slid out from under the truck, wiping his hands on a grease-streaked rag. When he looked up at her, his dark brown eyes held a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, with a strong, square jaw and the kind of presence that commanded attention without trying. "That's me," he said. "Who's asking?" She extended a hand. "Evelyn Carter." He didn't take it. Instead, he leaned back against the truck, crossing his arms over his chest. "Carter, huh? As in Carter Enterprises?" She smiled, unfazed. "So you've heard of me?" "Hard not to," he said dryly. "Now, why is someone like you in a place like this?" Straight to the point. She appreciated that. "I have a proposal for you," she said smoothly. "One that could be mutually beneficial." His skepticism deepened. "Yeah? And what exactly would that be?" She met his gaze without flinching. "A marriage." Silence. A long, heavy pause where the sounds of the shop, The distant rev of an engine, the metallic clang of a dropped tool, faded into the background. Then he laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that echoed through the shop. "That's funny," he said, shaking his head. "Really, but seriously, what do you actually want?" Evelyn didn't blink. "I'm not joking." His smile faded, replaced by something more cautious. "You want me to marry you, a woman I've never met?" "Yes." "For what?" "That's not relevant," she said coolly. "What matters is that it's temporary, 6 months. You don't have to change your life, and you'll be well compensated." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I don't need your money." "I'm not offering it for you," she countered. "I'm offering it for the shelter you volunteer at. Think about what you could do with unlimited funding." His jaw tensed slightly. She had struck a nerve. Still, he didn't answer right away. He just watched her, like he was trying to decipher what kind of person would make such an outrageous proposition. She extended a business card. "Think about it. You have 24 hours. James took the card but didn't look at it. His gaze remained on her, sharp and assessing. As she turned to leave, Evelyn knew she had already won. Because people like James, people who spent their lives giving to others, could never walk away from the chance to do more. And she was counting on that. James Weston had made a lot of questionable decisions in his life, but agreeing to marry Evelyn Carter might just top the list. He wasn't sure what had compelled him to say yes. Maybe it was the way she had walked into his garage like she owned the world, unwavering and determined. Or maybe it was the fact that deep down, he knew she was right. He could do a lot more for the shelter with her money. Whatever the reason, 24 hours later, he found himself standing in front of a towering Manhattan high-rise, suitcase in hand, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The doorman, a stiff-looking man in a perfectly pressed suit, gave him a once-over, his gaze lingering on James's worn leather jacket and scuffed work boots. James smirked. He was used to people looking at him like that, like he didn't belong. The only difference was, this time, he was stepping into Evelyn Carter's world, a place where he most definitely didn't belong. "Can I help you, sir?" the doorman asked, his tone polite but distant. "Yeah." James exhaled, gripping the handle of his suitcase a little tighter. "I'm here for Evelyn Carter." The man blinked, clearly struggling to reconcile the rugged, broad-shouldered mechanic with the pristine world of high society. After a brief hesitation, he stepped aside and gestured toward the elevator. "Penthouse level, sir." James nodded and stepped inside. The elevator was absurdly quiet, the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. As the doors slid shut, he leaned against the mirrored wall, running a hand through his short-cropped dark hair. What the hell was he doing? The elevator dinged and the doors glided open to reveal a sprawling penthouse, all sleek surfaces and minimalist decor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the city, the lights stretching out like a sea of glittering diamonds. The place smelled like money. Expensive leather, fresh-cut flowers, and something subtle yet unmistakably luxurious. Evelyn was already waiting for him. Dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored black pants, she stood near a marble kitchen island, a glass of wine in hand. She didn't look surprised to see him. If anything, she looked satisfied. "You're late," she said, her tone as cool as ever. James raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know we set a time." She simply tilted her head toward a side hallway. "Your room is down that way, the guest suite." So they weren't even pretending to share a bedroom. Good. At least that meant she had no intention of playing house. He set his suitcase down and took a slow look around. "Nice place." "It serves its purpose," she replied smoothly. "I assume you don't need a tour." James chuckled. "Not unless you're worried I'll get lost." That earned him a faint smirk before she gestured toward the kitchen. "A lot of them. We will attend functions together when necessary. You will dress appropriately. You will not embarrass me in front of my associates, and this arrangement is strictly professional. Understood?" James took a beat before answering. "Got it. Now, do I get to set any rules? Or is this a dictatorship?" She didn't seem amused. "Your job is to stay out of my way. Do that, and we'll get through these 6 months just fine." James wasn't sure why he had expected anything different. The next morning, James quickly realized that their worlds weren't just different. They were entirely incompatible. Evelyn's mornings were regimented. She was up at precisely 5:30 a.m., starting her day with a perfectly portioned breakfast of organic fruit and some green juice that looked like swamp water. Then came a relentless schedule of back-to-back meetings, conference calls, and business dealings that she navigated with ruthless efficiency. James, on the other hand, was used to rolling out of bed when his alarm or a customer forced him to. His mornings usually involved a large plate of pancakes, a strong cup of coffee, and figuring out which engine he'd be elbow-deep in for the day. Their first real conflict came over breakfast. James had woken up early and rummaged through her oversized, state-of-the-art kitchen, only to find it stocked with things he barely recognized. Organic greens, imported cheeses, obscure health juices. Finally, he settled on making himself eggs and bacon. The smell of sizzling bacon filled the kitchen, and he was just about to dig in when Evelyn walked in. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at the plate like it had personally insulted her. "What is that?" she asked, her nose wrinkling in distaste. He glanced down at his breakfast. "Food," she exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "You're going to make the entire place smell like grease." James shrugged. "That's kind of how cooking works." She muttered something under her breath and grabbed a green juice from the fridge. "We have a chef for a reason." "Yeah, well, I'm not really the tiny gourmet portion type," James said, taking a bite. "I like real food." "Then don't burn my kitchen down in the process." From there, things only escalated. She dragged him to a high-end tailor, where he stood stiffly as measurements were taken, feeling like a mannequin as they dressed him in a three-piece suit that cost more than his entire apartment. He took her to a small diner in Brooklyn just to see her reaction. She had stared at the laminated menu like it might bite her, then carefully ordered a black coffee, clearly repulsed by the idea of greasy burgers and milkshakes. At social events, she led him through rooms of Manhattan's elite, introducing him with smooth, calculated charm, while he struggled not to laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. They were oil and water. But what surprised James the most wasn't how different they were. It was how unshakable Evelyn was in her belief that she could control everything, even him. And maybe, for the first time, she had met someone who wouldn't be controlled. James Weston wasn't sure what he had expected from this arrangement, but watching Evelyn Carter squirm in a place she clearly didn't belong was something he hadn't anticipated enjoying quite so much. It started when he challenged her to step into his world. After days of enduring her meticulously curated high society events, of being paraded around like a well-dressed accessory, James had had enough. So one evening, after yet another silent, tense dinner, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and issued his own challenge. "Come with me tomorrow," he said simply. Evelyn barely glanced up from her wine glass. "Come where?" "The shelter." Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass, but she kept her expression impassive. "Why?" James smirked. "You dragged me into your world. Seems only fair you step into mine." She let out a slow exhale, as if debating whether the inconvenience was worth it. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "Fine." The next evening, dressed in a fitted navy coat over an elegant cashmere sweater, Evelyn stepped out of the car and into an entirely different world. St. Mark's Shelter was nothing like the pristine, designer-funded charities she was used to. The building was old, the paint peeling, the entrance crowded with people looking for warmth as the fall air turned frigid. For the first time since James had met her, she looked uncertain. Inside, the air smelled of cleaning solution and something vaguely metallic. Volunteers moved quickly, distributing food, sorting through donated clothes, and checking in the people who had nowhere else to go. The walls were lined with folding tables and mismatched chairs, filled with people who carried their entire lives in tattered bags. Evelyn stood stiffly by the door, her perfectly polished heels looking absurd against the scuffed linoleum floor. James almost felt bad for her. Almost. "All right, princess," he murmured, nudging her forward. "Let's see if you can last an hour." Her jaw tightened, but she followed him inside. For the first 20 minutes, she hovered near him, watching, studying. She was out of her element, but Evelyn Carter was nothing if not adaptable. When a frazzled volunteer handed her a ladle and motioned toward the soup station, she hesitated for only a second before stepping behind the counter. James had expected her to crumble. He had expected her to make an excuse, to retreat the moment things got uncomfortable. But she didn't. She kept her head high and did the work. At first, the people passing through the line barely acknowledged her. But as the night wore on, something shifted. A little girl with tangled hair and wide brown eyes peered up at her as she accepted a bowl. "You look like a princess," she said in awe. Evelyn blinked, visibly caught off guard. Then, to James's utter shock, she smiled. A real, genuine smile. "What's your name?" Evelyn asked. "Sophie." "Well, Sophie," Evelyn said, handing her the bowl with an elegance that somehow made even soup distribution look regal. "I think you look like a princess, too." Sophie giggled, then hurried away with her mother. James, watching from a few feet away, found himself staring at Evelyn like he was seeing her for the first time. By the time the evening ended, Evelyn looked exhausted. Strands of blonde hair had come loose from her otherwise impeccable style, and there was a faint smudge on the cuff of her coat. But she hadn't complained once. As they stepped outside, the crisp night air wrapping around them, she rubbed her hands together for warmth. That was different. James shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. "Not what you're used to, huh?" She was quiet for a long moment before finally shaking her head. "No." He expected her usual tone of dismissal, a snide remark about inefficiency or how money would be a better solution. Instead, she turned to him and said something that caught him completely off guard. "I didn't realize how much people relied on places like this." James studied her, trying to gauge if she was just humoring him. But her expression was unreadable, something complicated flickering behind her green eyes. "Well," he said, voice gruff, "now you do." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of city traffic. Then, finally, Evelyn exhaled. "I'll come back." James raised an eyebrow. "What?" She met his gaze, her chin lifting just slightly. "I said I'll come back, to help." For a second he didn't know what to say. Then, unable to stop himself, he let out a low chuckle. "You sure about that, princess?" She smirked. "Try me." James shook his head, but there was something close to admiration in his expression. Maybe, just maybe, Evelyn Carter wasn't as predictable as he'd thought. As they climbed into the car, heading back to their carefully constructed life, James couldn't shake the feeling that something between them had shifted. And for the first time since this ridiculous arrangement had begun, he wasn't entirely sure how it was going to end. Evelyn Carter prided herself on control. Every aspect of her life was a meticulously designed blueprint, and she followed it without deviation. But ever since she had stepped into St. Mark's shelter, ever since she had seen the way James moved through that world, his world, something inside her had begun to shift. And she didn't like it. She told herself she was simply following through with her promise. That's why 3 nights later, she found herself once again stepping out of a black town car in front of the shelter. The same peeling paint, the same weary faces waiting outside, bundled in too thin jackets against the biting October chill. But this time, she wasn't observing from a distance. She was stepping inside, sleeves rolled up, ready to work. James was already there, of course. He always was. He glanced up from a pile of folded blankets when she walked in, eyebrows raising slightly. "Didn't think I'd see you back here so soon." She smoothed her coat, chin lifting slightly. "I said I would." His lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Guess you did." That night was different from the first. The initial awkwardness had faded, and instead of hesitating, Evelyn simply did what needed to be done. She worked the food line again, this time more efficiently, her movements less stiff. She handed out blankets, actually talked to the people coming through. She learned their names, their stories, the woman who had lost everything in a house fire, the young man trying to get clean after years on the streets, the mother who had fled an abusive home, cradling a toddler against her chest. It was overwhelming. Evelyn had spent her entire career sitting in conference rooms, discussing charity in terms of numbers and tax benefits. She had never stood face to face with the people who needed those donations. She had never seen what desperation really looked like. By the end of the night, exhaustion tugged at her bones in a way that no 12-hour boardroom marathon ever had. James walked her out to the car, hands in his pockets, his usual smirk replaced by something quieter. "You did good tonight," he said. She huffed a short laugh, shaking her head. I handed out soup, James. That's hardly an accomplishment. You listened, he corrected. That's more than most people ever do. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. There's a fundraiser this weekend, he said, for the shelter. Local businesses, community members, nothing fancy, but it helps keep the lights on. You should come. She hesitated. Her weekends were usually filled with high-profile galas, exclusive gatherings where deals were made over champagne and five-star meals. But the thought of another night spent in that hollow, glittering world suddenly felt suffocating. I'll think about it, she said finally. James just nodded, as if he had expected that answer. See you around, princess. And with that, he turned and walked back into the shelter, leaving Evelyn standing alone on the sidewalk, the invitation clutched in her hand. The fundraiser was held in the back lot of the shelter, beneath a string of mismatched lights that flickered against the night sky. There were folding tables covered in checkered cloth, homemade food piled high, and the sound of laughter and conversation filling the air. It was a far cry from the opulent charity galas Evelyn was used to, where socialites in designer gowns bid on silent auction items they didn't need. But somehow this felt more real. She spotted James near a makeshift stage, talking with an older man who clapped him on the back with obvious affection. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, jeans, boots scuffed with years of honest work. He looked comfortable. He looked like he belonged. Evelyn swallowed hard and smoothed the front of her coat before stepping forward. James caught sight of her immediately. His eyebrows lifted, but there was no surprise in his gaze, just that same unreadable expression he always wore around her. Didn't think I'd see you here, he admitted as she reached him. I said I'd think about it, she replied smoothly. I thought about it. His lips quirked at that, but he didn't press further. Instead, he gestured toward the food table. Hope you're hungry. Mrs. Thompson made her famous chili. Evelyn glanced at the line of people eagerly ladling steaming chili into bowls, some of them topping it with shredded cheese or crumbled cornbread. Her carefully curated diet of organic greens and protein shakes felt laughably out of place here. She sighed. Fine, but if I die of sodium overdose, I'm holding you personally responsible. James chuckled, guiding her toward the line. Deal. For the next hour, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in a long time. She let go. She sat at a folding table with people she had never met, eating food that wasn't prepared by a Michelin star chef, listening to stories that had nothing to do with stock markets or real estate. And for the first time in longer than she cared to admit, she felt like she was part of something instead of just observing from the outside. As the night wound down, James found her standing near the edge of the lot, watching as volunteers packed up tables and chairs. He came to stand beside her, hands in his pockets, shoulder brushing lightly against hers. So, he said after a moment, what'd you think? She exhaled, her breath visible in the cool night air. It was different, he chuckled. That's your way of saying you liked it, isn't it? Evelyn didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out at the people, laughing, hugging, carrying leftovers home with gratitude in their eyes. And then softly she said, Yeah, I think I did. James didn't say anything, but when she glanced up at him, she saw the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. And for the first time since they had met, she realized something. She wasn't just playing along anymore. She was changing. And it terrified her. Evelyn Carter was losing control. For the first time in her carefully managed life, she didn't have a clear strategy. She had spent years mastering the art of manipulation, of knowing what moves to make before her opponent even realized they were playing a game. But James Weston wasn't an opponent, and this wasn't a game, not anymore. The problem was, she didn't realize how much had changed until it was too late. It started with the article. She had just returned from a morning meeting, sipping her meticulously crafted oat milk latte, when her phone buzzed. Sophie, her assistant, never called unless it was urgent. Evelyn, Sophie's voice was tight, laced with something uncharacteristically close to panic. Have you seen the news? Evelyn frowned, setting her coffee down on the glass counter of her penthouse kitchen. No. Why? There's an article, Sophie said, pausing just long enough for Evelyn's pulse to spike, about you and James. Her stomach twisted. She tapped on her phone, fingers quick and precise as she pulled up the latest business headlines. And there it was, plastered across the screen in bold, damning letters. Manhattan mogul's marriage. A strategic move or a scandal. Beneath the headline was a glossy photo of her and James at the fundraiser. She remembered the moment vividly, him leaning in, smirking at something she had said, their body language too easy, too natural. It had been the first time she had let herself forget the rules, the first time she had let herself just be in the moment. And now, it was being picked apart by every gossip columnist and business analyst in the country. Her fingers clenched around her phone as she skimmed the article. Speculation ran rampant, claiming that her marriage to James was a calculated move, a ploy to gain complete control of Carter Enterprises. Sources, anonymous, of course, whispered about a wager between her and Nathan, about how she had chosen a working-class mechanic as nothing more than a piece in a corporate chess game. Her breath caught in her throat. James didn't know about the bet. And now, there was a very real chance he was about to find out in the worst way possible. James Weston didn't read tabloids. He barely skimmed the news, unless it had something to do with the shelter or the auto shop. But that morning, when he walked into work, his foreman, Greg, was already holding up a newspaper, shaking his head. "Tell me this ain't true." James frowned, tossing his jacket onto a nearby workbench. "What?" Greg slapped the paper onto the counter. Right on the front page was Evelyn's face. And his. James stared at it, a slow, sinking feeling spreading through his chest. The words were just a blur at first, but then he caught the phrases that mattered. A bet, a calculated move, a strategic marriage. His grip tightened on the newspaper, jaw clenching. He had known from the start that he and Evelyn came from different worlds. He had accepted that. Hell, he had even agreed to play along for 6 months, knowing it was temporary. But this made him feel like a damn fool. Greg exhaled. "Look, man, I don't know what's real and what's not, but if there's one thing I do know, it's that you don't deserve to be used like that." James didn't answer. He couldn't, because suddenly everything clicked. The way Evelyn had saw him out, the way she had framed their arrangement like a business deal, the way she always seemed like she was trying to keep him at arm's length, even when something between them had started to feel real. He had started to trust her, and that had been his biggest mistake. Evelyn knew she was running out of time. By the time she reached the garage, she already saw James standing outside, arms crossed, tension radiating from every muscle. He didn't look furious, not yet, but he looked like he was bracing himself for a fight. She stepped out of the car, heels clicking against the pavement, heart hammering against her ribs. "James, tell me it's not true," he said, voice even but tight. Evelyn swallowed hard. "I can explain." His lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not an answer." The weight of the moment pressed down on her. She had talked her way out of countless bad situations, turned entire boardrooms in her favor with nothing but a well-placed argument. But this wasn't business. This was James. And for the first time, she didn't have the right words. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," she admitted, voice quieter than she wanted it to be. James let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "But it was like this, wasn't it? From the start?" Evelyn didn't lie. She didn't sugarcoat. So she gave him the only thing she could, the truth. "Yes." The single word hung between them, heavier than any explanation could have been. James exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just looked at her, really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. And for the first time, she hated what he saw. "I can't do this, Evelyn," he said finally, voice low. "I won't be someone's pawn, not yours, not anyone's." Her throat tightened. "James?" But he was already turning away, walking back toward the garage, away from her, away from everything that had started to feel too real. And just like that, Evelyn Carter, the woman who had spent her entire life winning, realized she had lost something she might never be able to get back. Evelyn Carter had always been good at damage control. When business deals went south, when the media spun stories in the wrong direction, when competitors tried to pull her down, she knew exactly how to handle it. She fixed things. She rebuilt. She adapted. But this wasn't something she could fix with a press release or a well-crafted statement. This wasn't business. This was James. And she had lost him. The days following their confrontation were suffocating. The silence in the penthouse was unbearable. An empty space where James's presence had once been. A cup of coffee left on the counter, the faint scent of motor oil lingering on the furniture, the sound of his deep, rumbling laughter that she hadn't realized she had grown used to. She buried herself in work, throwing herself into meetings and negotiations with ruthless efficiency. But no matter how many contracts she signed, no matter how many deals she closed, it didn't distract her from the weight pressing against her chest. The feeling was unfamiliar. She had never let anyone get close enough to leave this kind of void when they walked away. And yet, here she was, pacing in her office late at night, staring at her phone, debating whether to call him. Instead, she found herself driving. It was almost midnight when she pulled up outside Weston Auto. The garage was dark except for the single light glowing inside. She hesitated, fingers gripping the steering wheel, her pulse quickening in a way that both frustrated and unsettled her. Evelyn Carter did not do hesitation. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to step out of the car just yet. Through the window, she saw him, James, leaning over a car engine, his back to her. Even from here, she could tell he was exhausted, his shoulders tense, movements slower than usual. He had been working late, just like always. But tonight, something about it felt different, heavy. She inhaled sharply, then pushed open the car door and stepped out. The cool night air bit at her skin as she approached, heels clicking against the pavement. James must have heard her footsteps, because he straightened, wiping his hands on a rag before turning around. The moment his gaze met hers, something flickered in his expression, something unreadable, guarded. "Evelyn," he said, voice flat. "What are you doing here?" She swallowed. "I needed to talk to you." He let out a short, humorless laugh, tossing the rag onto the workbench. "Talk about what? How you played me? How I was just another deal to you?" She flinched. "It wasn't like that." James shook his head, crossing his arms over his chest. "No? Then tell me how it was, Evelyn. Tell me what part of this wasn't a damn transaction to you." Her throat tightened. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed the words in her head 100 times on the drive over. But now, standing here, looking at him, none of them seemed good enough. She could have told him she never meant to hurt him. That somewhere along the way, things had changed. That he had changed her. But all she said was, "I'm sorry." James exhaled, running a hand through his hair, looking more tired than angry now. "Sorry doesn't change anything." "I know." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. The distant hum of the city filled the space between their words, headlights from passing cars casting fleeting shadows against the garage walls. Evelyn looked down, her hands clenching at her sides. She hated this, hated feeling powerless, hated knowing she had hurt someone in a way that couldn't be undone. "I didn't expect this," she admitted, voice quieter now. "I didn't expect you." James's gaze flickered, something softening for just a moment before he forced it away. "Yeah," he muttered. "Well, neither did I." Another silence, but this one felt different. Less like an ending, more like a pause. Evelyn took a slow breath, forcing herself to look at him. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to come here. I had to tell you that it wasn't just a game to me." James studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then finally he nodded, just once. "I'll see you around, Evelyn." It wasn't an invitation, it wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a goodbye either. And somehow, that was enough. For now. Evelyn Carter didn't believe in waiting. If she wanted something, she got it. If she lost something, she found a way to reclaim it. But for the first time in her life, she didn't know how to move forward. Days passed since her late-night visit to Weston Auto, and she hadn't spoken to James since. She told herself that it was for the best. He needed space, and she needed time to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do with the mess she had made. But the silence gnawed at her, a constant reminder that she had ruined something that, for the first time, had actually mattered. She sat in her office on the top floor of Carter Enterprises, staring out at the skyline, a half-empty glass of whiskey beside her. Normally, she would have been buried in contracts and negotiations, but today she found herself distracted, restless. Nathan's voice cut through her thoughts as he strolled in unannounced, as he always did. "You look terrible." Evelyn didn't bother looking at him, Charming as always, Nathan. He smirked, dropping into the chair across from her. No, really, you're brooding. It's weird. What happened? Did someone outbid you for a luxury hotel? She exhaled sharply, swirling the whiskey in her glass. It's James. Nathan's smirk faded, his expression turning surprisingly serious. Ah, the mechanic. Evelyn shot him a glare, but there was no real heat behind it. Don't. He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. So what's the plan? Because I know you, Evie. You don't just let things go. She was quiet for a moment before she admitted. I don't know what the plan is. Nathan's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if he was genuinely surprised. Well, that's new. Evelyn pinched the bridge of her nose. I hurt him, Nathan, and not in a way that can be undone with a few well-placed words or a business deal. I don't think he trusts me anymore. Nathan studied her for a long moment before sighing. Look, I give you a hard time, but you're my sister, and I know when something's real for you. It's real. Evelyn swallowed, the weight of that truth settling in her chest. Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. So fix it. She let out a humorless laugh. And how do you suggest I do that? Nathan shrugged. I don't know. Do something crazy. Something that proves you mean it. James didn't expect to see Evelyn again anytime soon. But then again, he had stopped trying to predict her actions a long time ago. It was late when he heard the commotion outside the garage. He'd been finishing up a brake job when the sound of voices, laughter, and music drifted in from the street. Frowning, he wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, only to stop short at the sight before him. A full-blown block party was happening right outside the shop. String lights had been strung up between buildings, tables were set with food from local vendors, and a live band was playing on the makeshift stage. Kids ran around with balloons, and familiar faces from the shelter and the neighborhood were all there, celebrating. And standing at the center of it all, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, completely out of place yet somehow belonging, was Evelyn Carter. James blinked. What the hell is this? Evelyn turned, spotting him. And for the first time in days, he saw something besides guarded control in her eyes. There was uncertainty, a flicker of vulnerability. She stepped closer. It's for the shelter, she said, almost hesitant. I spoke with some of the local businesses, got them to donate food and supplies. The money raised tonight goes directly to keeping the place running. James exhaled slowly, glancing around at the people enjoying themselves, the kids laughing, the volunteers working the booths. This wasn't some grand corporate charity event. It was real, personal, and it had her fingerprints all over it. He looked back at her. Why? Evelyn swallowed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Because you were right. About everything. About how money isn't always the solution. About how I've spent my whole life trying to control things instead of actually being part of something. James crossed his arms. And you think throwing a party fixes that? She shook her head. No, but it's a start. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then finally, something in his expression softened. You did all this? She nodded. With some help. Turns out people are willing to rally behind a cause when you actually listen to them. James let out a slow breath, then did something that surprised both of them. He smiled. A real, genuine smile. Well, I'll be damned. Evelyn felt her own lips curve, relief washing over her. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. Evelyn Carter had spent her entire life thinking that control was the key to success. That as long as she planned meticulously, executed flawlessly, and never let emotions cloud her judgment, she would always come out on top. But standing there, watching James Weston laugh with a group of shelter volunteers, she realized something. Some things weren't meant to be controlled. Some things had to be felt. The fundraiser had been a success, more than she could have imagined. The shelter had raised enough money to keep its doors open for at least another year, and more importantly, it had brought the community together. She had spent the evening working alongside James, handing out food, talking to people, and seeing, really seeing, the impact of what they were doing. But now, as the event wound down and people began packing up tables and chairs, she couldn't ignore the tension still lingering between them. Yes, James had smiled at her. Yes, he had acknowledged her efforts. But they both knew there was still a divide between them, an unfinished conversation waiting to happen. Evelyn took a deep breath and walked over to him as he loaded a folding chair into the back of a truck. "James?" He turned, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What's up, Carter?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before meeting his gaze. "Can we talk?" James studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, let's talk." He led her a little away from the crowd, to a quieter spot near the edge of the lot. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of grilled food and warm asphalt. Evelyn crossed her arms, not out of defensiveness, but to keep her hands from trembling. "I meant what I said earlier," she began. "I didn't do all of this just to make things right with you. I did it because I needed to, because I needed to understand what you were trying to show me." James leaned against the side of the truck, arms crossed. "And?" She exhaled, looking down for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "And you were right. About everything. About me. About the way I've lived my life. I've spent so long trying to win that I never stopped to ask if what I was fighting for actually mattered." James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then he let out a slow breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, Evelyn, I didn't need you to change. I just needed you to be honest with me." She nodded. "I know. And I wasn't. Not at first." The words felt heavy, but also freeing. She had spent so much of her life crafting perfect narratives, but this time, she wasn't spinning a story. She was just telling the truth. James studied her, and for the first time in days, she didn't see the guarded distance in his eyes. "So what now?" he asked. She swallowed, gathering her thoughts. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know that I don't want to go back to who I was before this. And I don't want to pretend that what happened between us didn't mean anything." James let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "You know, for someone who always has a plan, that's a pretty uncertain answer." Evelyn smirked, something warm flickering in her chest. "I'm learning to live with uncertainty." James nodded slowly, as if turning the words over in his mind. Then, after a pause, he reached for her hand, his grip steady and warm. "Then I guess we'll figure it out together." She felt the last of the tension in her chest dissolve, replaced by something unfamiliar. Hope. The past few months had started as a bet, a challenge, a game she had been determined to win. But somewhere along the way, it had turned into something real. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Carter was okay with not knowing the ending. As they stood there beneath the glow of string lights and the hum of distant laughter, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't lost it all. Thanks for watching. Where are you watching from? If you loved this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more great stories like this one. Share this video with your friends and family so they can enjoy it too. Tell us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. There's plenty more amazing stories waiting for you, so stick around and keep exploring. See you in the next videos.